Listeners, what does it mean to write the truth when your story includes trauma, and how do you do it without re traumatizing yourself or your readers? That's what I'll explore with this week's guest, Beth Docherty, a trauma informed healthcare educator, musician, emerging memoirist, and my client. During this episode, she shares her journey from research chemist to advocate for safer, more compassionate care. And together we dive into one of the most important questions memoirists ask. How do we write about hard truths in ways that are honest, responsible, and healing? To help us do this, Beth opens up about her own trauma history, trusts me with a unique exercise, tells us about how storytelling became a tool for connection, and explores the care it takes to write bravely without burning out. Grab your pen, open your heart, and get ready to explore how to regulate your nervous system while writing, what readers really need from you, and how to know when your story is ready for the world. Whether you're writing about survival, shame, or resilience, this episode will help you write from a place of self trust, not self sacrifice. Let's dive in. Welcome to Writing Your Resilience, a podcast for writers who want to create stories that change lives, especially their own. I'm your host, Lisa Cooper Ellison. As a writer and trauma-informed writing coach, I'm here to guide you on a transformative journey through the art of writing, self-discovery, and resilience. Each week, I'll share my best tricks, tips, and strategies to help you write more authentically, craft deeper, truer stories, and overcome the common storytelling roadblocks we all face. Together, we'll explore how to bounce back when life gets tough and stay connected to your inner calling. So grab your pen, your notebook, and an open heart. It's time to do the work that changes the world, one story at a time. Well, hello, Beth. It is so exciting to see you. And for listeners, I get to see Beth twice today because we had class. So, welcome to the Writing and Resilience podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. It's a true honor. I have such the highest respect for you. So I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
I'm excited to have you on because you have a great question that I know listeners also have. So I'm excited for you to share that. But before you do that, can you tell us a little about yourself? So, who you are as a writer, anything else you want us to know, and then you can end with that question.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. So I started my career as a research chemist. I was trained in structure and precision and logic, but life, as we know, is not always predictable. And I have a trauma history, and our vulnerabilities come out in the strangest places, and mine came out in the healthcare setting. So I avoided care. Even routine appointments were really traumatic and overwhelming for me. And I eventually found out that I wasn't alone in that so many people avoid, so many survivors of trauma, especially sexual abuse, avoid and actually enter the space feeling unsafe, which is never good for anyone. And that led me, it was kind of a life changer, and it led me to becoming an educator and an advocate for trauma-informed healthcare, teaching healthcare providers how to understand how trauma shapes the body and the brain and behavior and also healing. And a couple of years ago, I began writing my first memoir. And music has always been a creative outlet for me. I've had it since the beginning of time. I think I was born with it, but I never considered myself as a writer. But writing really opened up something new in me. It was just another way to process my experiences and share them to others with care. And, at the same time, I've always carried a little bit of a fear of traumatizing someone else. I know how powerful stories can be and how hurtful words can be as well. And for example, like my tolerance level might be more than someone else's. Maybe I'm ready to say something, but somebody's not ready to hear it. So I feel like that makes it complicated. So I guess my question is, as a trauma informed writing coach, how do you approach balancing the truth and truth telling with care for the reader? And how do we really write responsibly without silencing ourselves?
That is such an important question. And I also just want to say that you are doing such incredible, important work in the world. And that's one of the things I love about getting a chance to work with you because we have different trauma histories, different ways that we've experienced the healthcare system. And I mean, I have the privilege of knowing your story, so I know these differences. And yet, what can be very similar for many people, whether that is someone has actually been harmed by the medical industry, or maybe you have a chronic illness, right? And so being in there again and again and again, there can be those kinds of traumas. It can show up in so many different ways. So I'm so glad that you are such a powerful advocate for people in this space. And your story is so powerful, and people are going to be able to get a taste of it soon. I'm so excited about this for you because you have a HuffPost article that's going to be coming out. We don't know exactly
Yes,
when yet, but I'm very excited about that.
I am too.
So let's dive into, what does it mean to write in a trauma informed way, right? And so when we're thinking about being trauma informed, we're thinking about, okay, how does trauma impact the nervous system and the setting? In this case, the setting is writing. And so when we're thinking about writing in a trauma informed way, the first thing we want to think about is ourselves, right? As writers, how do we write in a way that either keeps us in the window of tolerance? And I say this lightly because we all go outside the window of tolerance, okay? I'm a writer too. There's plenty of times where you think something is, a 5, it's not that big of a deal. You start writing about it, it's a 20. Okay. And all of a sudden you're in the trauma. So we get outside of the window of tolerance, where the window of tolerance is the space where we can write about something and it may be slightly activating, but it doesn't feel out of control in terms of how our nervous system perceives it. Right. So we want to try to write within that window of tolerance at all times, knowing that we're going to come out of it. And when that happens and we get dysregulated, we do different things to regulate ourselves. So, what you first want to do is know, well, what is your window of tolerance? And as you said so astutely, sometimes trauma survivors have a really high window of tolerance. That means that you can go deep into the trauma and write about it in a visceral, graphic way. That's what I mean by that. Other people barely can touch it. Maybe they're not even on the page. They're writing about everybody else, but they're not writing about themselves because it feels so dangerous. So, in each of these cases, the person's window of tolerance is different. So, the first thing you want to do is just get an understanding of what that window of tolerance is. And if your window of tolerance is high and you need to write things in a vivid and graphic way for yourself to understand what happened or bear witness to your experience on behalf of yourself or the reader, do that. It's okay to do that for yourself, especially if you're working through that with a therapist. I think that can be really healing because, the first thing you have to do is know what happened to you. What happened? What is the story, right? The story of what happened. And then we get to, what does it mean? And that's what the reader cares about. So the reader cares about, well, what does it mean? So we have to attend to that vulnerability piece. And sometimes that means, writing in whatever way. And if you notice, oh, wow, I write in this really vivid, graphic way and it feels okay. Does it really feel okay? That's the first question you want to ask. Does it really feel okay or not? And you're laughing and I'm laughing because there have been times where it's like, that doesn't really feel okay, but it feels normal to what my nervous system tolerates. That's a different thing. So you want to really attend to your own vulnerability. You want to think about, what is that like for you to write about it? And are you regulating your nervous system? So practice that first as you are telling things to the level of vividness that is necessary. And sometimes the only way we know is by sharing things with a safe other person. Maybe that safe other person is first a therapist who asked you questions. And if they're asking you more questions, maybe they need more details. Other times, you may notice that if you are working with a therapist, especially you're sharing things with someone who has the healer component for you, they might say, okay, let's back up, let's focus on your body, right? So those are some signals you can use to say, well, what's that like for me? So once you have things down, that's the first goal, and not to censor yourself. Because I think sometimes when people think, oh, I want to write in a trauma informed way, I don't want to overwhelm my reader, so I have to pull back. My invitation is keep yourself regulated, but don't pull back in the beginning. Let yourself write whatever you need to. Then you want to pull back and say, okay, does this make sense to me? Do I understand what it means? And sometimes you want to do some exercises to help yourself understand that. And then once you understand what it means, you want to think about, what does my reader need? So, because you have been working in this field, and another question that you shared is, well, how do I go beyond the news reportage? And there may be many reasons why that's a struggle. Some of that could be due to the vulnerability, but some of it might be due to, well, what does my reader really need? How much of this vulnerable story do they really need? Because we don't want to re traumatize ourselves by sharing work that is overly vulnerable, right? We want it to be vivid enough for the reader to get something, but not so vivid that we're overexposing ourselves. So I want to take you through an exercise, if I may. Is that okay with you?
Yep, that's fine.
All right, you have 18 years of experience working with people in terms of trauma and, speaking out about sexual assault. That's another thing that you do. You have been doing this for a while, and I'm sure you probably get questions from your audience. Is that correct?
I get questions, I get disclosures, a lot of disclosures.
Yeah. And that can be really hard. And I think I'm going to wrap up this session by asking you how you're taking care of yourself around that. So I'm going to come back to that. But we're going to talk about the fact that, yeah, you're getting these disclosures, you get questions in the middle. So that means you have access to your audience. And so when we're thinking about what needs to be on the page, we want to attend to our readers' desires, fears, and wants. So if you think about who your readers are for your book based on these self disclosures that you have, or these disclosures that people do, or the questions they ask. Let's pull back, and we don't have to talk about any specific person, but what do they want from you?
I think the first thing would be to feel connected and to not feel so alone in what they're going through. Just hearing that somebody else has gone through the same thing, I think can be very powerful.
When they come up to you and they say, Beth, I heard your story and it touched me so much, what part made them not feel alone?
The fact that I shared what I had gone through, especially, when it's related to healthcare, especially related to like the sexual abuse, the assault, the rape, just knowing that somebody else had experienced that too. And they're usually appreciative that I have shared out loud in person because it's often something that people don't want to talk about.
So your audience needs some of those details about what happened.
Right.
So they might need some of the details, but maybe not all of the details, right? Enough to know, like, yeah, you went through something that I went through. But I'm wondering if it's not just about that you're speaking it out loud, that you are talking about the shame.
Right. That is huge.
So, what are some of the other feelings that you share on a regular basis, or specific details where people say, you know what, that part of your story just touched me because when I went through this, blah, 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 or it reminded me of, what's a thing that you share? And you don't have to tell all the specifics about your story, but
Well, sometimes I share that I didn't tell anybody right away,
yeah,
and that's very common. But when you're going through this and when you've kept it to yourself for so long, it feels like you're the only one. It
yeah,
can feel that way.
yeah. So the fact that you talk about something that you know is common, not telling, that you talk about feeling so alone, you share about the shame that this happened, I could have stopped it, or all of the things that, like, there is this bundle of common experience, like feeling experience that people have, and you share that. So people want to be heard, they want to be believed, they fear that they're all alone, that they're going to be misunderstood. And we're just brainstorming here. So there's no right or wrong answers. And listeners, I'm asking Beth to do this because this is the kind of thing I want you to do when you're thinking about your audience and what your audience needs. So if you think about their wants, their needs, or their desires, what else do you know about them?
I know that they're mostly women. I mean, there are men too, but the majority are women. I know it's common and so many people have experienced it. I know that they want to be believed. I mean, I think you already said that, but it's a big one. So many people go through this and they're not believed. Or, even in a situation where it happens in somebody's home, maybe the parent doesn't believe that the uncle or somebody else did
Right.
this, hearing that it's like an affirmation that, okay, it wasn't just me. And again, it touches on the shame, it touches on all of that.
Yeah. So, some things that your readers need from you when we think about specifics, they might need some high level specifics about the actual things that happened, the abuse, the terrible thing, we'll call it. What they really need from you is they need for you to be able to talk about the shame, for you to be able to talk about the fears of not being believed. They want to see how people reacted, right? So, especially if people reacted poorly, so that they can see how does it relate to my experience.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, so when we're thinking about, well, how do you write in a trauma informed way? You understand what this experience means to you, right? So you understand, what would I want to tell young Beth about this? Right? That's one exercise that you can do to say, okay, well, what does this all mean? Like, why am I writing about this? Why does it matter? So one thing you can do is you can say, what would I tell my younger self? And you can journal about that. Another thing you can do is you can watch a bunch of moth stories. Okay, so
I love the moth.
yeah. So this is what I want you to pay attention to. So listeners, if you're not watching the moth is great for this. I want you to watch them, and one of the things that happens in all moth story is there's a takeaway, right? In a lot of oral storytelling, that takeaway is not subtle. They share, I learned this, I became this, I discovered this. They're sharing what that takeaway is. Pay attention to those stories. Notice what those takeaways, and then if you had to create a moth version of your story, what would those takeaways be for you? So these are two exercises that you can do to really understand your own story. So once you understand that, then you're saying, I know the sense it makes to me. So what do I need to share with my reader? Okay, can I create a scene where I show myself feeling really shamed? The terrible thing is important a little bit, but the shame, that's more important. Highlight that.
I would assume the resilience would also be important.
Yes. Yes. And so how is she coping with that shame? What does she do when people react poorly? Like, how is she handling that? Right? Because what they want is to see how the narrator is coping with these challenges. And sometimes, if it's the early part of your book, the way people cope is usually by having faulty thinking, or they might cope in ways that aren't great. As the book goes along, we see this person coping in more helpful ways, right? They're coping in ways that are probably more beneficial to them. When you're thinking about that piece of writing in a trauma informed way, you're focusing on their fears, their desires, and their needs, and you're answering those questions they have or mirroring the experiences that they have, and then thinking about how much of the terrible thing do they actually need to know. And usually it's a lot less, but they need a lot more of that other stuff, because that's the part that's hard, is not so much the horrific thing that happened, it's the reverberations out afterwards.
That makes perfect sense.
So how's that landing for you, and what is that making you think about?
Well, it makes perfect sense, like I said, and I think one thing that kind of stuck out when you were talking about making sense of your story first, I teach a lot and do a lot of talking about self-care, and I remember one of the first classes that I had with you, you talked about, how are you feeling? Like, think about, what is your energy level? How are you feeling? Do you have the support that you need? Are you okay to do this? What are you doing after you're done writing this piece? And it was a game changer for me because I didn't do that. I just pushed along like I always did. Didn't matter if I was doing something afterward. That's okay. I'll just push through that too. And I have totally changed the way I approach that now. When I'm beginning to write, I think about, well, what am I going to write today? What am I being drawn to? Do I really have the energy to do that? Like you said, is it a 5 or is it a 20? If it's a 20, then do I really want to write about that today? Or should I ever be writing about a 20? Maybe it should be a little bit less. That was one thing that really stuck out to me.
Yeah. And so, listeners, if you're wanting to know more about that, I actually created a video series on becoming a resilient writer, and I will add that series to the show notes. So, if you want to learn more specifically about how you can rate your writing sessions or the topics you could potentially write about before you start, that video series will teach you exactly how to do it. And that is a great way to regulate your nervous system and write in a trauma informed way. Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, I'm serious. It was really powerful for me.
So I want to find out, have I answered your question, or does it lead to something else that you would like to ask me?
Yes, it answers my question.
Yeah, and another thing I'm just going to share that you wrote about to me was like that vulnerability piece. Like, so how do I know? So there's about attending to the reader's needs, right? Which we've just talked about. But when we're beginning to share our work, how do I attend to my own needs when I'm sharing my work, even if I know it's of highest service to others? And I share that because I have actually seen where people have published their work and then they realize that they're overexposing themselves every single time they're sharing it. So it's actually, even though it might be really powerful, it may be well received, it might be exactly what your reader needs, it's not necessarily what you need. So before you're sending things out in the world, you really want to check in with yourself to say, am I ready to share this? And what I often say to people is, would you shout it in Walmart? If you could shout anything in Walmart, right? I do say that, and when I think about my newsletter, even, I think, would I shout it in Walmart? Because if I wouldn't shout it in Walmart, and just listeners, I do not go around shouting things out in Walmart, just FYI. But if I had to shout it out in Walmart, would I feel bad about myself? Or would it feel like too much? And the answer is that's my litmus test. If I'm like, wow, I really don't want people in Walmart knowing my business, it's not ready. It's not
Right.
fully cooked for me, and it doesn't matter how good it is for others. So that's another piece that I just want to talk about in terms of that vulnerability.
Yeah, and I did go through that with the HuffPost article, knowing, like, am I going to be okay with all of this going out to this large audience? And I ultimately decided yes, but it's still a little bit, I don't want to say scary, but, you know, I'm waiting for it to come out and, waiting to see what happens, but I decided to do it anyway.
And it's okay to say that it's scary because I think it does feel scary for a lot of people.
Yeah, this is my first big one. I mean, I've been sharing my story publicly, but it's been in smaller venues or people that are interested in the topic as well. So this will be different.
Yeah, and since we don't know when well, we know when this podcast episode's going to come out, but we don't know when that article is going to come out. When it does, I will link it in the show notes. And it should be out, I would say, by probably October of 2025 at the very latest. It will be out. We are recording this in May. And so who knows? It could be out before this episode airs. We just don't know, because this is true for all of you listeners. If you are trying to publish something, that sometimes you don't know the answers to when things are going to be published. So I want to wrap up by circling back to the one thing that you talked about in terms of being a public speaker and getting a lot of self disclosures, right? So people are sharing a lot of personal information with you about stories that are similar to your stories. And what can happen is that we can have what's called vicarious trauma. So, vicarious trauma happens when you are listening to other people's stories. And often, I would imagine, and again, we're not going to share anything specific, but I would imagine that people have shared pretty graphic things with you.
They have. Yes.
Yeah. So, how are you caring for yourself in those situations where you're the speaker, you have to be on, and you're receiving all of this really intense material?
Well, I try to be very aware of who my audience is beforehand. And even the room, I try to look at the room ahead of time just so I'm comfortable. And then afterwards, I make sure I have time. Like I'm not going right to something else. Like I have my husband, I usually call him, or, sometimes I'll have a friend and we'll meet and go out to lunch or something or whatever. But just so that I'm not alone, a lot of times I might have like band rehearsal that night so that I could just chill and have fun and sing and play. And it's just different ways that I don't take it in to the point where it's traumatizing to me. And I always give them references as well, resources so that they can get help if they need it. I'm not a therapist, so I wouldn't want them to start calling me about it, about their trauma.
I love that. And so, what I love about it is that you have these ways of discharging the energy, right? So, yes, when you're in a situation where people are telling you their story, there's a lot of energy, but you're discharging it through having fun, your band, you go out to lunch. You also understand the space, right? So, you're thinking about it ahead of time, like, who am I going to be engaging with? What does the space look like? how can I take care of myself afterwards? And I think this is really important for all writers to hear. Yes, you may have gone through something and now you know something that's really important that you would like to share. And even if you are an expert, it doesn't mean that it is your job to take care of everyone, right? So just because someone comes and they tell you their story, it does not mean that you now are in a contract where you have to care for that story and take care of them and fix their problem. You don't. And what I love is you have resources. So when someone shares their story, you can let go of it because you have given them what they need to take care of themselves. Yeah, beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Well, if people want to connect with you, learn more about you, and most importantly, be prepared for that HuffPost essay, which is awesome, that is going to be coming out soon, what are those ways that people can connect with you?
Well, I have a Facebook account and a LinkedIn, and I also have a new website, the Trust Project PA.com, that will be up and running definitely before this airs.
Yes. So Beth's website, her social media handles will be in the show notes. So you will be able to connect with them. And I highly encourage you to connect with Beth, especially if you have been harmed by the healthcare system and you want to know more about what it means to engage in trauma informed care, because Beth is an expert and she is advocating for that. And the more we all know, the better we can all do when it comes to that.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Beth and most importantly, connect with her, please see the show notes for this episode. But before you go, I would love it if you would text the show if you're on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or leave a comment on YouTube with the answer to the following question. If you're working on a book, who's your audience and how are you connecting with them right now? I would love to hear what strategies you're putting in place, and I would love any feedback you have on this subject. And speaking of your thoughts on this podcast, I would love to give a quick shout out to Michael Nortness and Hannah Sward, author of Strip, a memoir, who was also a guest on the show, for your fantastic comments on my episode with Dr. Risa Reiger. Thank you so much for listening. And listeners, if you haven't had a chance to connect with the show, I would love to hear from you too. Until next time, remember that your story matters, and as you work on it, you change lives, especially your own. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. I truly couldn't do this podcast without your support. If you love this episode, here are 3 simple ways you can keep this show thriving. 1, subscribe or follow Writing Your Resilience on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube so you never miss an episode. 2, leave a 5-star review to help others discover the podcast. 3, join my engaged writing community by signing up for the Writing Your Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Write More, Fret Less, a toolkit for gaslight proofing your writing practice. Have feedback for the show, a topic you'd love me to cover, or questions you'd like me to answer? Drop a comment on YouTube, text the show, or email me at writingyourresiliencepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, keep writing, keep growing, and keep showing up for yourself. Your story matters, and I am so proud to be writing alongside you.